Mr. Dassey, how do you get along with Mr. Kaczynski?
Not bad.
Does not bad mean good or what?
Yeah.
When most people think of making a murderer, most go right to the controversy surrounding the main defendant in Steven Avery, and for good reason. He's had a serious wrong done to him by the courts, and then another is believed to have happened in regards to the case that landed him in jail again, and where he remains to this day. But another element of the case is that of Brendan Dassey, the nephew of the defendant, and one who has gone and suffered equal injustices. So given all of that, allow us to show you, Making a Murderer, Brendan Dassey's case so far. Number 8. His early life. Brendan Ray Dassey was born to Barbara and Peter Dassey in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin, and has 3 brothers. At the time of his indictment, Dassey was a 16-year-old sophomore at Mishicot High School. With an IQ in the borderline deficiency range, he was enrolled in special education classes. Dassey was described as a quiet, introverted young man with an interest in WWE and was upset when he missed WrestleMania 22, animals, and video games. So, not unlike his uncle, he was very much someone who doesn't appear to be a threat, and other elements prove that in their own way. Before the case, he had no involvement with the criminal justice system, which is another important thing to factor into everything, because when it comes right back to it, you think that someone who had committed a heinous crime would have some indication beforehand that he or she was disturbed in one way or another, but not here. The case to come, though, would ignore that in various ways in order to get a verdict. Number 7. Theresa Halbach. Theresa Halbach was a simple photographer born in 1980. 25 years later, in early November, she went missing, and her parents called in to the police to let them know that their daughter was missing. Now, lest you think that her parents were just overreacting, they hadn't seen their daughter in days, and she honestly lived right next door to them. So if anyone would notice that she was gone, it would be her parents. Halbach was known to have visited the Avery Salvage Yard in Manitowoc County on October 31st, 2005, just days before her death. On November 10th, 2005, following the discovery of her Toyota RAV4 partially concealed on the Avery property, Calumet County Sheriff Jerry Pagel conducted a search and found the charred remains of Halbach. Her cell phone, license plates, and car key were also recovered. Fast forward a few days and Steven Avery's blood was found in her vehicle, a clear sign that he was involved in part or in whole with what happened to her. Avery was charged with the kidnapping and murder of Halbach, mutilation of a corpse, and illegal possession of a firearm. But wait, you say, if Avery was arrested for everything, why is Dassey the one we're talking about? Because as many would go on and state, he had a clear connection to the case, and what happened with him is heavily debated to this day. Number 6. The arrest of Brendan Ray Dassey. You see, while it may have been Avery's blood in the truck of Theresa's, his alibi was Brendan Ray Dassey. Both Brendan and his mother agreed to come in and talk with the police, but it was during that interrogation that things started to take a turn, because using approved interrogation techniques, Dassey admitted to helping Avery, who again was his uncle, kidnap, violate, and kill Theresa Halbach. He was arrested and charged on March 1st, 2006 with being party to a first-degree homicide, sexual assault, and mutilation of a corpse. The special prosecutor, Ken Kratz, held a major press conference about the 2 cases, discussing the charges against Avery and Dassey, and reading verbatim elements of Dassey's confession, which is where a lot of the story honestly takes place, because the media in cases like this play a big role whether they want to admit it or not. And as time goes on and people started hearing more details about the case, they started to realize that things may not have been as by the book as the police interrogators made it seem. Thus, Brendan may not be as guilty as those in law enforcement thought. Number 5. Brendan's interrogation. No doubt many of you know about the importance of an interrogation room at a police station or precinct. And you also know that if some shady antics go on by the officers or detectives in the interrogation room, people can be wrongly accused or confessions can be coerced. Which brings us to Brendan Ray Dassey. Dassey was interrogated on 4 occasions over a 48-hour period, including 3 times in a 24-hour time frame, with no legal representative, parent, or other adult present. Now, they'll tell you that this is legal, and it is to an extent, but if he asked for his lawyer, the interrogation would be over. Thus, why many cops in TV and in real life tried to get the truth without the lawyer card being played. Dassey was interrogated via the Reed technique, which was developed to permit and encourage law enforcement officers to use tactics that pressure suspects to confess. Now, this may seem like a logical thing, as cops want and sometimes need a confession in order to book a suspect. But what happens when they're pressuring someone who doesn't fully understand the situation? Dassey had been clinically evaluated as being highly suggestible, which makes a suspect more compliant and can ultimately lead to improper interrogation outcomes such as false confessions. And these kinds of false confessions have happened in the past with much more mentally active people than Dassey. So despite what some would think, coercion is a real thing and something that should not be allowed. Number 4. The defense counselor. This is where things get tricky because eventually Dassey recanted his confession, a big deal for a case like this. Furthermore, he alleged that his first defense counselor was someone who was working with the prosecution to try and get both a guilty verdict against him and Avery and to get him to testify against his uncle. Due to this, his lawyer was replaced and the trial began. That casts a lot of shade on the case, especially since it was confirmed that the first lawyer chose to not go and be with Dassey during the first set of interrogations. Why would he not do that for his client? Number 3. The trial. The Dassey trial began on April 16, 2007 with a jury from Dane County, Wisconsin. The trial lasted 9 days with a verdict delivered on April 25, 2007. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, finding Dassey guilty of various charges. Despite only being 17 at the time, he was tried fully as an adult, and as a result of that, he was given life in prison with only getting a shot at parole in 2048, which would have made him about 58 when that happens. A very key factor, though, is that his mental capacity or lack thereof was deemed irrelevant by the court. A very curious thing, as many would go on to note. Number 2. Making a murderer. And this is where Netflix comes in, because in 2015, they released the first part of their documentary series, Making a Murderer, and when they did, and focused on the case with Avery and Dassey, the people who watched were shocked by the methods and apparent bias used to convict both of them, including forcing confessions and manipulating evidence. After getting some new representation due to the outcry from the show's release, a retrial was proposed multiple times. In August 2016, United States Magistrate Judge William E. Duffin ruled that Dassey's confession had been coerced and was therefore involuntary and unconstitutional and ordered him released. But an appeal blocked said release. Then an en blanc or judge panel case was approved, and in that trial, the original conviction of Dassey was upheld. A very curious series of circumstances for those on the outside looking in. Number 1. The latest on Dassey. Whether Brendan Ray Dassey is guilty or innocent is something that is still heavily debated to this day, especially since the Supreme Court of the US was asked to overlook a retrial appeal and they removed the case from their docket without explanation. Dassey's attorneys are now asking Governor Tony Evers to consider clemency for early release. They argue Dassey's confession to the crime was coerced by detectives. Dassey was 16 at the time of his confession and considered to be low IQ. Brendan Dassey was a 16-year-old intellectually disabled child when he was taken from his school and subjected to a uniquely and profoundly flawed legal process. That process rightly sought justice for Theresa Halbach, but it wrongly took a confused child's freedom in payments for her loss. Such a debt could never be justly repaid with the currency of innocence, reads the clemency petition. Could this work? Possibly. It's hard to say given how long things have already gone on, but in truth, if it works, it could change everything, not just for Dassey, but for Avery. Only time will tell for sure. So what'd you think? What'd you think of this look at Brendan Dassey and his case that went from disturbing to possibly and incredibly corrupt? Do you think he doesn't deserve to be in jail given all that happened to him illegally? Does this prove in your mind that both he and Avery are innocent of what they were accused of? Or are there other elements here to consider? Let us know in the comments below, and we'll see you next time on the channel.